There is a symbol at the heart of the American identity that, for many, is the ultimate proof of a secret, hidden history. It's on the back of the most common piece of currency on earth, the $1 bill. It's the Great Seal of the United States. A strange, disembodied eye floats above an unfinished pyramid over the Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. For hundreds of millions of people, this is not just a quirky design. It is the ultimate smoking gun. The calling card of a secret society. A society that, according to a vast and popular conspiracy theory, secretly built America, guided its revolution, and embedded its occult symbols in the very DNA of the nation, all in service of a new world order. That society, of course, is the Freemasons. The conspiracy theories are wild, ranging from the Masons being a front for the Bavarian Illuminati, to them worshipping a pagan goat god named Baphomet, to them being a deep state that has controlled the world for centuries. But here's the most fascinating and challenging part. The conspiracy theories are half right. They are wrong about the occult symbols, the goat gods, and the New World Order. But they are absolutely correct about the influence. The connection between the Founding Fathers and the Masons is not a conspiracy theory. It is a plain, historical fact. George Washington was a master Mason. Benjamin Franklin was a Grand Master. Paul Revere, John Hancock. 13 signers of the Constitution and 33 generals of the Continental Army were all Masons. The intellectual and social elite of the American Revolution were obsessed with this secret society. So, why? If it wasn't a global conspiracy, what was Freemasonry? Why were these Enlightenment-era politicians, philosophers, and generals so dedicated to this private, ritualistic club? What was the secret they were protecting? Today, we look past the conspiracy theories to find the real, historical answer. And it turns out, the true story is far more profound and more politically significant than any myth. Before we can understand why the founders joined, we have to erase our modern-day image of Freemasonry. Today, we might think of the Shriners in their little red fez hats, driving go-karts in local parades, or a local Masonic lodge as a civic organization, a gentleman's club that does charity work and has pancake breakfasts. In the 1700s, it was something entirely different. It was the single most important and influential social and philosophical network of the Enlightenment. Freemasonry, as we know it, formally organized in London in 1717, but its roots are older. It was a fraternal organization that used the tools and allegories of stonemasons as symbols for building a better humanity. But its real, explosive appeal was not its secrets. Its appeal was the space it created. Think about the world of the 1700s. It was defined by two rigid, absolute hierarchies. 1. The state. The absolute power of the king and the aristocracy. You were born a noble or a commoner, and that was your fate. 2. The church. The absolute power of the state-sponsored church, like the Anglican Church in England. This church dictated not only your faith, but often your politics, your science, and your social standing. The Masonic Lodge was a radical third space. It was a private room where, in theory, those two hierarchies were suspended. It was the only place where a commoner like Benjamin Franklin, a printer's son, and a nobleman like the Marquis de Lafayette could meet on the level, as brothers and equals. The secret of Freemasonry wasn't a world domination plot. The secret was privacy. It was a space, free from the prying eyes of the king's spies and the church's bishops, where men could freely discuss the most radical ideas of the day: Enlightenment philosophy, scientific rationalism, individual liberty, and republicanism. It was, in essence, the perfect gentleman's club for a revolution. So, was it anti-Christian? No. Was it Orthodox Christian? Also, no. This is the key. Freemasonry was built on a theological framework that perfectly matched the intellectual spirit of the Founding Fathers, deism. To join a lodge, you had to profess belief in a supreme being. But that's it. The Masons called this being the great architect of the universe. This was a deliberate, big tent concept. Whether you called this architect God, Yahweh, Allah, or just Providence didn't matter. What was expressly forbidden was any sectarian debate. You could not argue about whether Jesus was divine or whether the Pope was infallible. This made the lodge the perfect meeting ground for the American founders. George Washington was a devout, if famously private, Anglican. Benjamin Franklin was a classic deist who was skeptical of all organized religion. Thomas Jefferson, whose Masonic ties are debated, but who was philosophically aligned, was a rationalist who famously took a razor to the Bible to cut out the miracles. In a traditional church, these men would have been at each other's throats. In the lodge, they were all brothers, united by a shared, rational belief in a creator God and a set of shared moral values: reason, order, truth, and charity. It was, in effect, the unofficial church of the Enlightenment. And its philosophy was the intellectual fuel for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So, the philosophy was a perfect fit. But the practical function of the Masons was even more important. It was the social network of the revolution. It was the 18th century LinkedIn. Remember, in 1770, the United States was just 13 separate, bickering, and mutually suspicious colonies. A politician from Virginia had very little reason to trust a merchant from Massachusetts. But if they were both Masons, they were brothers. They had sworn the same secret, sacred oaths. They had participated in the same rituals. This created an instant, unbreakable bond of trust and fraternity that transcended colonial, political, and even religious boundaries. George Washington was made a Master Mason in Virginia. When he took command of the Continental Army, he found that 33 of his generals were also Masons. He was surrounded by men he could trust, because they were bound by the same oath. He took his own presidential oath of office on a Masonic Bible. Paul Revere was a high-ranking Mason. The Sons of Liberty, who planned the Boston Tea Party, held their secret meetings in a Masonic lodge, the Green Dragon Tavern. Benjamin Franklin used his Masonic credentials as his primary tool of diplomacy. When he went to Paris to secure French aid for the war, the single most important move that won the revolution, how did he, a commoner, get in the door with the French aristocracy? He did it by joining the Nine Sisters Lodge, the most elite intellectual lodge in Paris, where he became brothers with men like Voltaire and the Marquis de Lafayette. The Masonic network was the only secure, private, international network through which the American and French Enlightenment thinkers could safely coordinate and plan a revolution. Okay, the skeptic says, the networking is fine, but what about the dollar bill? You can't escape the all-seeing eye. That's the Masonic symbol. This is the most famous part of the conspiracy, and it's also the weakest link. This is a classic case of seeing a pattern that isn't really there. Let's look at the facts. 1. It's not an exclusively Masonic symbol. The Eye of Providence, a single eye in a triangle, had been a common Christian artistic symbol for centuries, long before the Masons adopted it. It was a standard, if somewhat obscure, Renaissance-era symbol for the all-seeing, Trinitarian God. 1. The Committee of 1776. The first committee to design the Great Seal of the United States had one Mason on it, Benjamin Franklin. His idea for the seal was not the pyramid. His idea was a biblical scene of Moses parting the Red Sea. His idea was rejected. To the final designer, the man who actually designed the seal as we know it, Charles Thomson, Secretary of the Continental Congress, was not a Freemason. He, along with William Barton, also not a Mason, combined several common elements to create the final design. The pyramid and the eye were his ideas, borrowed from common artistic and symbolic motifs of the day. For when did it appear on the dollar? The Great Seal itself wasn't even placed on the back of the dollar bill until 1935. At the direction of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace. They liked the symbol's spiritual meaning, but they weren't enacting some ancient secret plot. The real Masonic influence on America wasn't a secret symbol on our money. It was something far more profound and far more public. It was the ideas written on the other side of the dollar bill. In God we trust, a perfectly deist, Masonic-friendly phrase, and, of course, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. So, we are left with a clear historical reality. The connection between the founders and the Freemasons is not a conspiracy. It's a fact. But what was the nature of that connection? The conspiracy theory is wrong. It wasn't about occult rituals or a secret plot to build a new world order. The real influence was philosophical. The Masonic Lodge was the intellectual and social laboratory where the radical ideals of the Enlightenment, liberty, equality, fraternity, religious tolerance, and government by reason were nurtured. It was the only place where a future general, a future president, and a future philosopher could meet as brothers and safely imagine a new kind of nation. And this brings us to the final, crucial debate. On one side, was Masonry just a social club? This is the view that the Masons were, essentially, a revolutionary LinkedIn. It was a convenient social network for like-minded men. It didn't create the ideas of the Enlightenment. It just hosted them. Its influence is overstated. The founders were just products of their time, and this was the club they happened to join. On the other side, argument B. Was it a philosophical architect? This is the more profound view. It argues that Masonry was not just a passive host. It was an active, quasi-religious, philosophical movement in its own right. It was a church of reason that deliberately shaped the American Republic. In this view, the founders' obsession with Masonry is the key to understanding America's founding. It's the reason America was founded not as a Christian nation, but as a secular, deist, Masonic republic that intentionally pushed orthodox, sectarian religion to the private sphere in favor of a great architect and a government built on reason and natural law. What do you think? Was Freemasonry just a convenient, historical backdrop for the revolution? A social club that gets too much credit? Or was it the secret, philosophical engine that actively designed the secular, rationalist, and pluralistic nation we live in today? Let me know your thoughts, respectfully, in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into America's most famous secret society fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that uncovers the hidden stories and complex evolutions of faith. Thanks for watching.